Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, so we've all heard that classic Shakespeare quote, right? What's in a name? A rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Well, let's just dive right into how that beautiful idea completely falls apart when you apply it to Eastern European geopolitics. Because over there, names are practically weapons. They are heavily loaded with history, identity, and, as we'll see, a lot of conflict.
Think about these tiny, seemingly minor grammatical choices, adding a simple the before Ukraine, or swapping the word in for on. Usually, we chalk that up to a typo or a quirky translation, but actually, these tiny linguistic details, they're sitting right at the center of massive modern-day ideological battles. These little words literally help define borders and sovereignty.
So today, we're going on an etymological detective hunt. We're tracing the history of Ukraine and Rus to figure out exactly why these words carry so much historical baggage. We'll be looking directly at the source texts to untangle a terminological chaos that's been brewing for literally centuries.
We are basically navigating a turbulent sea of history here, where words constantly play hide and seek, and identities are always shifting. Seriously, nothing is static in this region. The people representing early tribes, warriors, and empires were constantly redefining who they were, and maybe more importantly, who their neighbors were.
All right, moving to Section 1, dropping the as a symbol of statehood.
The history of modern Ukraine can almost be boiled down to a single three-letter word. In English, we typically use the for geographical regions. Think the Donbass or the Scottish Highlands, but not for independent countries. For a long time, it was written as the Ukraine, which reflected its formal status as just a part or the outskirts of the Russian Empire and later the USSR. So when Ukraine declared independence back in 1991, dropping that the was absolutely crucial. It was a massive signal of sovereignty. This is exactly why former US President Barack Obama got so much flack from journalists in 2014 for accidentally slipping up and saying the Ukraine. It's not just a grammar mistake, right? It's about recognizing statehood.
And our source notes a similar, maybe even more intense battle happening in Slavic languages. But here, the difference comes down to a preposition, on versus in. Saying on Ukraine suggests you're talking about the outskirts or a borderland, while in Ukraine strongly implies being inside a fully independent country. To put that into perspective, back in 2011, former Russian President Medvedev actually strictly corrected a group of historians, telling them they needed to use on. And Vladimir Putin, who had actually used in before, shifted entirely to using on Ukraine in the summer of 2013. The source points out that this linguistic aggression directly preceded the military aggression that followed in 2014.
Let's move to Section 2, Borderland or Homeland, a matter of perspective.
So where did this whole underlying tension actually start? Well, the absolutely crucial piece of the puzzle is the root word krayati, which means to cut or demarcate. It basically points to a specific area that's been cut off from other territories. Because of that, it can mean Kraina, the homeland itself, or it can mean Ukraina, the borderlands. And honestly, it entirely depends on where you happen to be standing. If you're sitting right in Kyiv or Lviv, well, it's your Kraina, it's your homeland. But to someone sitting outside that space, like in Moscow or Warsaw, you're the Ukraina, the outskirts. It's literally a matter of geographic perspective baked right into the language.
Now, despite the really common claim that it simply means borderland, the earliest historical texts we have actually use Ukraine to mean a distinct land or country. Take a look at these examples. In the 1187 Kyiv Chronicle, it describes a prince's death by saying, "All Ukraine groaned for him," which clearly means a country, not just a borderland. Then there's the 1556 Parasubnicha Gospel translation, which refers to the Judean Ukraina, meaning the actual land of Judea. And in local oral traditions, people would sing about my beloved Ukraina. It was just the default name they used for their home, Sort of like how people living in the Carpathians would just call their home the mountains.
Which brings us to Section 3, playing hide and seek, the name through time.
So as different empires rose and fell over the centuries, the name itself played this fascinating historical game of hide and seek. Tracing the timeline, the use of the name really peaks during the formation of the 1648 Cossack state, where leaders actively referred to our fatherland, Ukraine. Right around that same time, in 1651, a French engineer named Beauplan created this really famous map that labeled the wild steppe as Ukraine. But here's the catch. After the Cossack state was absorbed into Muscovy in 1654, the term essentially vanishes from official documents. It just gets swallowed up by the empire. In fact, it doesn't reappear in any major way until the 19th century nationalist revival swept across Europe.
And when it finally did reappear, it was championed by some seriously prominent cultural figures who intentionally adopted it as an identity marker. For example, the famous writer Nikolai Gogol registered himself at a spa in Carlsbad as Ukrainian. The young poet Larissa Cossack took on the pseudonym Lesia Ukrainka, and her uncle Mikhailo Drogomanov wrote under the name Ukrainets. They were purposefully using this term to draw a clear line in the sand, distinguishing themselves from Poles, Muscovites, Tatars, and Turks.
But actually, this brings up a super fascinating anomaly. Taras Shevchenko's Kobzar, published in 1840, is universally considered the foundational text of Ukrainian literature. The source even calls it a kind of national Bible. Yet, and get this, the word Ukrainian never actually appears in the text, not once. As the source wisely points out, the actual Bible never uses the words religion or religious, but nobody's out there denying it's a religious book, right? This just brilliantly illustrates that this distinct cultural identity robustly existed, even when the specific label itself wasn't strictly being used yet.
All right, on to Section 4, Cossacks and Haircuts, Cultural Intersections.
So that begs the question, if they weren't always officially calling themselves Ukrainians, what were they calling themselves? Well, the ancestors of modern Ukrainians were often referred to by Turkic words, which really goes to show how this entire region was a massive intersection of different worlds. They were called Cherkasy, which likely means warrior, or Cossacks, which translated to free person, nomad, or sometimes even robber. These names paint a picture of a really fierce, independent, and highly mobile culture living right there on the very edge of empires.
Now, this massive clash of cultures gave birth to some incredibly historic insults that highlight just how deep and early the differences between the peoples of this region really were. The Muscovites, who are the ancestors of modern Russians, wore these very long beards, and they heavily mocked the Cossacks for their traditional haircut, which was just a single lock of hair on an otherwise shaved scalp. They called them Kohols. But the Cossacks fired right back. They insulted the Muscovites as Katsaps, which means goats, specifically because of those long, unruly beards. I mean, these insults weren't just about bad fashion choices. They represented a very real, deep cultural and religious divide.
Let's dive into Section 5, the enigma of Rus, terminological chaos. Okay, so this brings us to the ultimate, final boss of historical terminology in this part of the world. We're talking about the word that sits at the very foundation of both Russian and Ukrainian history. For centuries, the people living here were simply known as Rus, and later variations of that name. But if you try to trace where this single tiny syllable actually came from, oh boy, you step into total terminological chaos. It is still fiercely debated to this day.
Our source breaks down two main competing theories. First, you have a local origin theory, which suggests Rus comes from an East Slavic tribe near the Raz River. This one was heavily promoted by Soviet state ideology because it supported the idea of local origins, but honestly, it lacks real historical proof. Then you have the Viking origin theory. Backed by texts as far back as 839, this theory argues that Rus actually comes from an Old Norse verb meaning to row. It referred to Scandinavian military units that navigated down the rivers. Kind of like the word Spaniards, the term Rus was highly likely an exonym. Basically, it was a name outsiders used to describe them, not what they actually called themselves.
And just to show you how incredibly sensitive this whole origin story was, let's look at the year 1749. A historian named Gerhard Friedrich Müller was giving a lecture at the Russian Imperial Academy in St. Petersburg, and he suggested these Scandinavian Viking origins. Well, he was literally shouted down mid-lecture by another academic who accused him of deeply insulting their people. A special commission even stepped in, silenced him, and basically told him to go study something a little safer, like the history of Siberia.
Moving on to Section 6, Ruski versus Rossisky, Civic versus Ethnic.
To untangle how all of this evolved into the complex terminology we see today, you have to notice how the word Rus physically split, largely based on the alphabets of its neighbors. The Latin form, Russia, was used in Western, Catholic-adjacent areas like Galicia. Meanwhile, the Greek form, Rossiya, was heavily championed by highly educated Ukrainian churchmen. So when Peter the Great decided he wanted to build an empire on the foundations of the old Muscovite kingdom back in 1721, he adopted this Greek form, Rossiya, importing it directly from Kiev.
And this linguistic split created a really vital modern distinction in the Russian language, one that honestly doesn't easily translate into English at all. Ruski is an adjective that means ethnic descent from the original Rus people. But Rossiyski, with an O, refers to civic citizenship within the Russian state. As the source beautifully explains it, someone like the famous chess champion Garry Kasparov is Rossiyski because he is a Russian citizen, but he is definitely not Ruski because he's of Armenian Jewish descent. They are basically like two dice that can roll entirely different combinations of identity.
We're going to leave you with this pretty profound thought from the source material. Long before modern borders were ever drawn on a map, long before passports or United Nations declarations even existed, the language, the haircuts, the insults, and the very names themselves proved that these identities were distinctly evolving on their own separate paths. Shakespeare might have thought names were just arbitrary labels, but in this part of the world, they are absolutely everything. It leaves us to wonder, how will the incredibly loaded language being debated and fought over right now shape the borders of tomorrow? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning what's in a name.